Okay, I'll stop now. Um, Fan I got at our Pride parade slash festival that we had a couple of weeks ago. Um, I volunteered at our church's booth at Pride for about 2 hours on that Saturday, and my niece's choir sang. So I was there during that time frame to watch her sing. Thankfully, our booth was very close to the stage, so that helped. And then I got that fan from one of the other booths, but I had left it at the at our booth for the church, so that way if anybody else needed to use it, they could, since I had to go to work anyway, and I just got it back yesterday because it got left there, and I had to ask our associate pastor, can I get my fan back? And he's like, yeah, I'll dig it out. Thank you. So, you might have, besides that, several other tangents throughout this video. Also, I'm recording this video the same day that I recorded the last Kawamatsu video, which will go up on Monday. So that's why I'm wearing the same Hulk shirt. Can't really tell that it's a Hulk shirt, but it's Hulk. Same shirt. So, yeah. If someone noticed that, sure. Okay. Now we are going to... This is the second video I've done today. So this is the chapter review for chapter 1153, titled Birth of Loki. And so that's fun. We're going to get to see the birth of Loki. That's the big climactic thing at the end of this chapter. We're going to jump through a good chunk of years throughout the course of this video. Throughout the course of this chapter, we start off where we left off last time, 109 years ago, all the way up to the birth of Loki, which was 63 years ago, which is, of course, the same year that everything happened with Linlin on Elbaf. Not at the same time. Loki was born first, and then everything happened with Linlin and the village and her hunger pangs and everything else like that. So there's a difference there, which I'll address at the end of the chapter. So first, we start out with the Yamato cover page story, and hence the thumbnail, because I was right. I mean, this was kind of confirmed about like a couple of weeks ago, a couple of chapters ago, when it was like Kawamatsu's the daimyo of Hakumai. And so that means that Kiku, as last daimyo, as a last scabbard remaining, and Ringo region as the last region Yamato has to go to, is the one who is the daimyo of the Ringo region, which we get shown here. We have Kiku and Yamato being overjoyed to see each other, which I love this. I love that Kiku is just literally like jumping out of her house to greet Yamato. I love that. I love that. That's so fun. And then we also have Boss Cho, who is the head of the Yakuza group that is in the Ringo region. She was the boss of the Ringo region as the Yakuza. I went over her in one of my other videos. Get to see her here. I think besides Hirogoro, way back when Yamato was saying goodbye to like everybody in the capital before he headed off on his trip, that I think we only saw Hirogoro. I don't remember, unless they were in the background of one of the other shots, I don't remember if we saw any of the other Yakuza leaders from the different regions, and we didn't see them when we were going through the other regions. So, but we see Chu here. She's probably helping with setting up connections, because the way that they're portraying, and I went over this in the Yakuza videos when I talked about Hirogoro specifically, and then when I talked about the other Yakuza, is that generally the way that the Yakuza are being portrayed in this setup in Wano is that during Orochi and Kaido's rule, they were trying to kind of defy Orochi, trying to do stuff to help people that Orochi wasn't allowing, like helping them get food and water and medicine and different things like that. That's kind of what's implied, and that the Yakuza had a fairly good honor system that they followed. Whereas and since I don't know that much about the Yakuza system and compared to like the Mafia system that I'm slightly more familiar with just like from American media, since they're kind of comparable. I mean, they're not exactly the same thing. Obviously, different cultures develop different ways of doing those types of things. But there are similarities. They're not the exact same, but there's some similarities. And, you know, I've watched some other anime that deal with, like, the Yakuza side of things and stuff like that. And some, of course, play it down. Other ones make it more dangerous, less dangerous. It depends on the setup that they're going with. But the Yakuza characters in One Piece, in regards to Wano specifically, are generally shown to be good guys, to be allies of the Kozuki family and protectors of Wano. And we saw that because the Yakuza leaders were part of the raid on Onigashima. Chu was there, along with the other one, or Cho, not Chu was a fisherman. Cho was there along with the other Yakuza leaders. But we see them here, and they're in Ringo. We do not see LT on page 1. Presumably they are just off panel. So we get this. And then we go into the chapter, which is essentially leaving off right where, picking up right where we left off last time, where we are singing a very young Harald with a very young Dorian Bragi, which is adorable. I don't know if this is the first time we've seen Dorian Bragi depicted as children. I don't remember if there's been any, like, someone asked Oda to draw Dorian Bragi and Oimo and Kashi as children. That might be the case, and I'm just not familiar with it, so I apologize if that's the case. But I don't know if they've shown anything of that. But we see here where, you know, this is obviously when they are much younger. And the thing that I want to point out that a lot of people didn't quite point out in the last video at times, or in, like, the last chapter review, is that at the end of the chapter review, they say that King Harald became king at the age of 45, roughly equivalent to being 15 in human years. Now, that does not mean that at the end of the last chapter, he was 45. That just means he became king when he was 45. And he looks, I mean, the way characters age in One Piece is like, as soon as you hit puberty, you just buff up or whatever the heck the case is. So there's a bit of a difference there for how puberty is portrayed in this. And then there's also like the whole, in a lot of shows and in a lot of like live action stuff, they cast like adults as teenagers. But we see Harald and Dorian Bragi here, and we see like one of the ladies in the background who's possibly Dory or Bragi's mother, just like scolding them, which is adorable. So it's Dorian Bragi shared a wild childhood with Harald, the Prince of Elbaf. It was like, born into the bloodline of the ancient giants, the prince possessed a colossal body, monstrous strength, and a high status. So again, this is like, he's got ancient giant blood that's very clear with his horns. He's got, you know, he's huge. Like, we see some of the other giants that like have the horns. They're not as big, but we see that he is supposed to be like comparable in size to like Loki, or possibly bigger than Loki, because we haven't seen like Harald and Loki side by side yet. But they're, you know, that type of a setup there for like how big they're supposed to be. And then of course he has high status. He is the king of Elbaf. And on top of that, and it says here, he grew into an arrogant and unruly rogue that no one could rein in. So this is again going into this archetype of this spoiled, like, only child royal, you know, royal only child. This kind of gets placed up a bit in Disney movies occasionally. Most notably Kuzco in The Emperor's New Groove, which I love The Emperor's New Groove. Most notably Kuzco there is portrayed as this very spoiled child. And, you know, he is given and handed anything that he wants on a silver platter at the snap of his, you know, the snap of his fingers or anything else like that. He can get whatever he wants. And that's kind of like what they're portraying here, except, okay, to be fair, Kuzco did want to destroy Pacha's village in order to build Cusco Land. So there's that. Harold and Cusco go on similar setups. It's just that Cusco has to get turned into a llama for him to learn a lesson, and almost die several times for him to learn a lesson, as opposed to Harald, who's going to get slapped and chewed out and learn the lesson possibly faster. I don't know, maybe Harald at some point encountered a witch and got turned into a llama as well, but I don't know. We haven't seen any of that in this flashback. So, this is supposed to be that, like, Harald was very vain, very arrogant, all of this, very unruly, as they say in the translation here. And, like, it could be, like, the picture that we see in the background is, like, Harald maybe as, like, a teenager, quote-unquote teenager, causing problems, like just what we saw with Loki when people were talking about Loki and how he caused problems for the citizens of Elbaf. Harald may have done the same thing, because it looks like he's going up against other giants in this picture. But he's the prince of the kingdom, and they can't really do anything against him. They can maybe kind of try to defend themselves, but you can't, like, kill the prince. Make note of that. So we cut back to where more current, as in 109 years ago, as opposed to childhood of Harald. Again, they're drawing similarities between Harald and Loki, and also, to a degree, Harald and Odin from Wano. Because Odin grew up as this, he is the only child, he is the prince of Wano. He is very strong, naturally powerful in that regard. Plus, he holds this, the title of, he's the Prince of Wano, essentially. And for Odin, he gets kicked out when he is, he gets kicked out of the Flower Capital when he's 18 years old by Sukeyaki. And in that regard, Harald is made king when he's 15 15 equivalency. And yeah, there's lots of rulers and kings and such like that, or princesses, who have been essentially king or queen since they were children. For example, Mary Queen of Scots was queen essentially from her birth, because her father died, like, shortly, either just before or just after she was born, and she was essentially queen her entire life. And then you have, like, Queen Victoria of England. You have of the UK, you have her, and she became queen when she was 18 years old when her uncle died. Actually, after, like, three of her uncles died. Three of her uncles, I think, died. Two or three of her uncles died, and then she was the one heir in that regard in her generation. And so she became queen when she was 18 years old. There's other rulers that have become king or queen much younger than that. If you want to look at Game of Thrones, you have Joffrey, who is not the best example. But then also, I have a bit of an interest in Game of Thrones and the history that goes into that for, like, how the Targaryen family tree breaks down. And there are multiple characters, kings and such, throughout the history of Westeros that they go through, particularly within the Targaryen family, who were, like, children when they were made rulers, when they were made king and queen. In the case of, like, they married and had a queen already. In that regard. So we kind of see that a lot here. Lots of cases in history have had that, where it's just like, it is a child ruler, and then they have, like, a regent that rules kind of in their stead until the child is old enough to take over in their own right. Bit of a history lesson there. Because I think it was Louis the Sun King, who I can never remember if he was Louis the 15th or Louis the 16th, because I can never keep them straight, of France. He was king, like, because of how old he was when he became king, all the way up to how old he was when he died. He was, like, one of the longest reigning monarchs in not just European history, but, like, the history of the world, I think. that they have like records on. So like there's another example there of someone who was made king very, very early on in life. She's snoring in the background. So back to the chapter. Sorry, history. That's one of the tangents. Back on track. So we cut to back when it's 109 years ago, and we see Harald on like the Great Eric or whatever variation of like another Viking longship very similar to the Great Eric. And we just see him sitting here very unceremoniously, legs spread, leaning back, picking his nose. And he's like, what a bore. Everyone outside Elbath is pathetically weak and puny. And he's just like, ain't that right, guys? And he like flips a booger and it like hits a shark. That I'm like, did the shark pop out of the water and you just happened to hit it? Is that what happened here? Or is it you flipped your booger so hard that it landed in the water and the water, you know, exploded enough of a force that a shark popped out of the water? I'm going to make a guess here and say that some people are going to think Harald has the Bomo no Mi, the bomb fruit that Mr. Five has. Because A, we don't know when Mr. Five got that devil fruit. And B, Harald just made something blow up with his boogers. So, you know, essentially it looks like something exploded with his booger. So take that. But we have no confirmation one way or another if Harald even has a devil fruit yet. But we see him like, you know, ain't that right, guys? And they're like, exactly, sire. It's just as you say. They're the king's yes men. And we see all of these guys have horns, or at least their helmets have horns. And this is obviously very much before Harald pulls off his own horns. We'll probably see that in the next chapter, in the next part of the flashback. Not in this chapter, because he has his horns all the way through this chapter, I believe. But it's, I think, in probably the next part of the flashback, we'll see this. And so now we cut to the kingdom of Bunt. New World. They make cakes. They make bundt cakes. This is what they do. This is what they're known for. I have no idea. This is the origin of the bundt cake in One Piece. I've never actually had a bundt cake, I don't think. Maybe I have. I don't remember. Maybe I have. But we cut to this kingdom, and it's in the New World, so it's on at least in the same area as like where Elbath is. And we see this, and it's like, come one, come all, standing 10 meters tall, each of her steps is an earthquake. Her roar is thunder itself. She's one of the world's elusive giants. Sailing all the way from Elbath, take a gander at Ida. Excuse me. Ida? I don't know. Ida. We're going to say Ida. And we cut to this girl, female giant, in a cage. She's got horns. They gave her horns. And she's kind of this more... Okay, and I do not mean this as any form of an insult, because I kind of fit this trope as homely, or more humble looking, less of the Oda typical beauty face. Not that she's not cute, and not that she's not pretty, and she still kind of has like the Oda figure, but she doesn't have, like, she's got like kind of the more curly-ish type hair, and we see that she has freckles, and her eyes aren't the same way that he draws, like, you know, Nami or Robin or Hancock or anything like that. She's different in that regard, and she has freckles, and her lips are more of the, you know, like the full looking lips like we've seen in other characters. Or not seen very much in female characters that Oda draws. But it's supposed to be that, like, Ida is supposed to stand out. Not Ida from My Hero, but Ida here is supposed to kind of stand out. And we see that she is inside of this cage, and we see this who's supposed to be like a Beastmaster ring, you know, or a Ringmaster Beast Tamer type thing. And Ida is like, like roaring and growling at like the crowd. And it's just like, get away from the cage, it's dangerous. And we see like all of these citizens, all these people here, and it's supposed to be like a circus setup here. And we see all of these people here, and they're all just like screaming in terror and like running away. There is one man who is like holding a little girl, and like the man is not scared. But everybody else is like terrified of her. And we see Harald and his crew have, like they're on like the coast. They're on like on the, just sailing up to the island. He's like looking through binoculars at where this is. And he's seeing that, they have her in like this circus tent and everything. And he's like, it takes balls to turn one of us giants into a roadside attraction. And he is very angry about this. And it looks like they fire a cannonball. And then we see that they have, or like we cut, and like now as they're sailing away, the island looks like it has been attacked. There's like smoke coming off of it. Some of the buildings look like they've been destroyed. And Harald is laughing. And he's like, they were fools to mock Elbath. We sure showed them. And we see Ida is here. We'll see. I don't know what the correct pronunciation is going to be yet. Is here. And she's like, who are you? And we see that like they brought her onto the ship, and like Harald and like two of the other giants are just kind of like waving friendly at her. And then it's like, no need to thank me. I'm the king of Elbath. I couldn't just sit back while they slighted my homeland. I love her reaction here. She just no thought, just right across the face. I love this panel. I specifically love this panel because it very much reminds me of when Nami slapped Sanji back at Whole Cake. Is one of the main things that it reminds me of is when Nami slaps Sanji at Whole Cake after he fights Luffy. And that it also just reminds me of every time that Nami has ever beat up Luffy. Just every time Nami beats up Luffy, it's just always what this reminds me of. Where she's like one of the only ones who can deal damage to him. That's not like some high over the top powered enemy or whatever, overpowered enemy, or overpowered individual. Nami is one of the few that can like actually cause damage to Luffy. Which again, some people put it as like, oh, does that mean Nami's going to have Haki? I want Nami to have Haki, to be clear. Second of all, a lot of people put it as like, it's the Nika fruit coming into effect because it's the cartoon physics of this girl who is definitely like one hit from Luffy in Gear 4th or whatever would be enough to just send Nami flying. And like, yet she is able to cause him damage. So it's like, it's the comedic effect of the devil fruit, of the Gama Gama no Mi, of the sun god fruit power. So she just slaps him, and all of the men are like, oh no, because they're like, oh god, the king just got slapped. And they're like, Your Majesty, King Harald, and we just see him here going like, like his eyes have been like literally opened, like they are so wide, because the way that he is drawn, the way that we see him drawn here, like earlier in the chapter, it's like his eyes are like not very much open, and then like they're very like angry when he sees, which to a degree I do not blame Harald for being angry about the concept of a giant being like used as like a slave or as like a roadside attraction, as he so puts it. I do not blame him for being angry about that part. I do not blame him for being angry about, but it's the fact that he just shows up, asks no questions or any type of an explanation as to what is going on. He just automatically assumes that this is the case, that they have trapped her here, or that they have enslaved her, or something like that. Which, given the history that we have seen of giants being enslaved, which what we saw try to happen with Stanson and other cases, in regards to like the world nobles and stuff like that with the Temuri Beach, we understand that, yes, this is something that could very much go down a very, very bad path here. But it's like, okay, she is a giant. They state all of the stuff that she can do, and yet they somehow have her in a cage. I'm like, pretty sure, cage/tent setup that they have her in here. It's like, pretty sure she could easily break out of that if she so desired. But that's not what we see here. But we also see is that she does not have any horns anymore. Her horns are gone. meaning that they are fake horns. And like every time else we see her in this chapter, she doesn't have any horns. And so she just slaps him. And like, yeah, he's just like, like he is befuddled as to what just happened, because he has grown up as this prince with a silver spoon in his mouth, essentially, on Elbath, being given whatever he wanted. And then now he's been king for however many years. Ida goes over and she's like, turn the ship around. You need to apologize. A lot of people got hurt. And Harald just yells at her and says, like, are you crazy? You want to go back to that puny doll kingdom? So some of the translations were like, you want to go back to that kingdom with like the puny humans that are like weak as dolls or something like that. And it's just puny doll kingdom is how he refers to it here. And she's just like, grr. And then we cut to her having beat him up, which is again very much the way that like Nami beats up Luffy for that like comedic effect setup. And she's like, you want me to rough you up? And they're like, oh my god, King Harold! They're just like so worried about him. She's like, they took me in and gave me work after finding me adrift at the brink of death. Thanks to their kindness, I was able to earn enough to eat and recover from my injuries. So again, it's Harold did not ask. He just showed up and started breaking things. He did not ask any questions. Luffy generally does not act that way. He generally, like, if he ends up in like a situation, like, he doesn't immediately assume, oh, this is a bad thing, or there's someone in trouble here. That usually ends up being the case, and then like it goes through, it's just like, okay, well, you know, this is going on, and this is going on, and this is going on, and then like Luffy finds out what's going on, or the rest of the crew find out what's going on, and then they're able to be like, okay, we have enough of information here to be like, okay. Or like when Nami, back on Punk Hazard, when Nami, Sanji, and Frankie and Chopper ended up in the biscuits room with all of the kids, they started asking questions as to what is going on, and then like the kids answer them to the best of their abilities, and then they're like, okay, yeah, we're gonna help you. Same thing with other cases where it's just like, or like Alabasta, they went in knowing that there was a problem. On Drum Island, they did not go in knowing there was a problem. They asked questions. Technically, you know, other things happen too. But like in other cases, it's not like they instantly assumed something was wrong in Shell's Town when they first showed up. When Luffy first showed up there with Kobe, they found out that there was problems. Same thing with showing up in Syrup Village, and then they find out from Usopp that, okay, no, Kuro's a bad guy, type of thing. So it's like, again, Harold is just jumping in, making this assumption, and not finding out what's going on. Kind of similar to what happens when Odin first shows up and interacts with Roger and ends up getting like Kamusari'd into a tree. Well, into a lot of trees. So what we're finding out here about Ida. By the way, I looked up the kind of the name setups of some of these for the characters here for both of both Loki and Hyrudine's mothers here. And Ida is a feminine name of German and Greek origin, meaning hardworking. In terms of Greek mythology, the name Ida holds much importance. Mount Ida of Crete is said to be the birthplace of Zeus. It was here that the future king of the gods was nurtured by nymphs before overthrowing the Titans and bringing in a new generation of gods. Unlike most myths, Mount Ida is indeed a real place, so this is a real place, and somehow and somewhere, tourists, a real place and somewhere tourists can visit as they walk through the ancient Idaean caves. If you're a fan of Greek myth and want your child name to be awesome, have an awesome storyline, Ida is a fantastic choice. Or Ida is a fantastic choice. So that's kind of one of the thoughts there. That's like where her kind of name origin kind of comes from. Now, whether or not Oda knows this when he's designing her is a little bit left up for debate. But I was like looking through stuff and I was trying to figure out, okay, there's a character that she kind of reminds me of in her design. And like part of me was kind of thinking like Anne of Green Gables setup or something like that. And I was just like, no, there's someone else. And like I was just kind of looking through other like anime characters that like I like, and I was like trying to think of who it reminded me of. And the best one that I could come up with that she seems to remind me of is Nikki Hanada from Dr. Stone. The blonde girl that is very strong, not not you know oh frick oh frick whatever she's a blonde girl that is very strong and very buff, and she was initially part of the Kingdom of Might, of Muscle, however you wanted to put it. And she's the one who is like the big fan of like Lillian of the Singer, that they have the recording from 1,000 years or whatever in the past. And so she's the one that Ida reminded me of. The other one that Ida reminded me of, given what we're going to see, I'll get to in a minute. But so Ida had at some point in time been adrift, nearly dead, landed on this island, was found, very much similar to how Saul lands on Ohara. Similarities, maybe, connections, possibly, maybe. And how, she landed on this island, on the Butt Kingdom, and they're like, oh, well, let's help her. And, like, they helped her, and then, like, she kind of is, like, assumedly this is supposed to be, like, her trying to, like, pay them back to a degree for the money that they spent on food and trying to help her and everything else like that, because she's so big, she probably ate a lot. And so it's, like, that's probably what's going on here. And so she willingly let them put her in this circus, have this be, like, this attraction to, like, draw in tourists so they can get money that way. Not a bad idea, in all honesty, and it's like, she can get out of there anytime she wants, she's fine. And we see her grab Harold, and she is now crying, the typical Oda crying face of, like, little dolls, what the hell is that supposed to mean? You just happened to be born big. Your strength is a quirk of fate. Don't kid yourself into thinking you're better than the humans, you arrogant disgrace. Oh, I love her. This kind of crap is why all of us other giants are always lumped in with you Elbath savages. So again, just like we see when it comes to Saul talking with Robin about Elbath, Ida here is talking about the fact that, like, all of the giants are generally lumped in with Elbath, and that's why so many of the giants are thought to be savages, because of all the stories people hear about Elbath. She doesn't like this because she's not a savage, and she doesn't like that everybody thinks she's going to be a savage just because she's a giant. And we see that, I love this, because, like, we also just see, like, this terrified look on Harold's face, because he is not used to people talking to him like this. He is not used to someone who will, like, put him in his place. Because he was, like, this treasured golden prince type of a thing, and then king. All this stuff. And she is not letting it fly. She's not letting him get by. She's not letting him, like, oh, well, I was strong, so why shouldn't I be? She's like, your being strong is just a freaking quirk of fate. You could have been born as a pitiful little human, as you call them, and you would be in the very opposite situation and probably have a very different view of the world. So she's just like, little dolls. That's not what they are. That's what you think they are, but that's not what they are. They are humans. They are alive. They are just as valuable as you are. All this type of stuff. And she's like, just because you're big and strong doesn't mean that gives you the right to treat humans or anybody the way that you just treated them. Or the way that giants from Elbath are portrayed as, always hurting and pillaging and everything else like that. And even at the end of the last chapter, we have it where it is stated that, like, if you asked anybody about what the terrors of the seas were, they would say the giant warrior pirates, the giants of Elbath, and Harold, king of Elbath. that setup there. And in a minute and in a little bit, we're going to get like this dichotomy a little bit between like how Harald interacted with humans and how Dorian Broggy interacted with humans in the past. So we'll get those comparisons in a moment. So we cut to the next page and we see that they did turn around and they went back to the island. And Harald is just kind of sitting there thinking, I was just born big. Is how he's just like, he's like possibly at like the head of the ship looking out at like the village, and he at the kingdom, he's like, I was just born big. And like being very contemplative as he is watching as Ida is here and she is like helping the citizens of the kingdom. You know, she's got wood that she probably helped like cut down or cut apart and everything else like that, because she would be able to do that a lot easier and a lot faster than the humans doing it. We see her, you know, helping with that. We see her smiling. We see her talking with the guy who was like the ringmaster, and like one of the other girls that was like one of the other people in the circus and everything else like that. And we just see how happy and smiling she is and everything else like that as she's interacting with these people who are her friends. This is very similar to what could have happened had like the citizens of Ohara, had they known about, you know, Saul be there, you know, except Saul. It is like showing us this kingdom, because in a lot of other places, had Ida landed there, they would have either called the world government and been like, hey, we got a giant here, called the Marines, hey, we got a giant that washed up on our beach, do you want to take care of her or something like that? And in this case, they helped her. They did not call in the Marines, so this may not be a world government affiliated kingdom for all we know. This kingdom may not even exist anymore for all we know, sadly. And like we see like the ship that the you know giant, this version of the giant warrior pirates is using, and they're like, King Harald, are we setting sail? You're just what are you guys spacing out for? Huh? And he's like yelling at them, help them rebuild, you imbeciles, that miniature model city of theirs. So this is I like that this kind of a callback to like Rhodes miniature city, and like all of them just like, yes sir, like head off to go and help. And this results in being a good thing, because we see that as they helped with rebuilding this kingdom, they are learning that like, oh, their construction techniques are completely different. We'll teach you some stuff for when you get back to Elbas. So it's like we see like the giants are all happy, and we see like the citizens are all happy and like cheering and everything like that. And we see that they rebuilt the castle. We see like some of the houses have been rebuilt and everything like that. Because again, some of the stuff that would take humans a long time to build in comparison, giants can just go like, and we're good. You know, much faster. They can lift things a lot easier, makes, you know, putting certain things in place a lot easier, and, you know, different things like that. You know, giants can carry a lot more materials in, you know, a much shorter amount of time than what, you know, humans can do in that regard. So they're doing that, and then it's like, your use of spices is something too. I've never eaten anything with this much flavor before. So it's this interacting of cultures. It's this interacting of the giants on the ship and the citizens of the kingdom. Very much how a lot of the times when the Straw Hats land on different kingdoms, they end up kind of learning about the kingdom. Like we saw this when they were learning about Dressrosa, when they first got to Dressrosa and everything else like that. They were befuddled by the fact that there were toys that were alive running around interacting with humans. But then we find out the Dark and Sinister set up aside that, but they're like, maybe that's just the way this country is. And, you know, different things like that. To be fair, a lot of the times with the Straw Hats land on certain kingdoms, they're trying to infiltrate it and learn information, like what happened in Dressrosa, what happened in Whole Cake, what happened in Wano, take your pick. But in some cases, they also just kind of embrace like what's going on the island if there's no immediate obvious threat that they are trying to deal with. And then we see Ida go over to Harald, and she's like, you know, come on. And she brings him over to the king, and either she has convinced him to do this, or he is swallowing his pride in doing this, where he does the whole, you know, all the way down and bowing and everything else like that to the king and apologizing. And we see the king, who does look annoyed, but which is fair. they just kind of destroyed his kingdom, but they also helped rebuild it. So it's just like him apologizing and all of this stuff, and we have like other quotations going on. I was just like, and the quality of your fabric, they're so sophisticated. Humans sure are good with their hands. So again, this is like things that the humans can do that the Vikings may not necessarily be able to do on that small of a scale, like miniature models and different things like that in comparison, for that type of stuff. And then like one of the next panels on the next page, or at the bottom of the page, is Harald. And, like, a bunch of little kids are, like, climbing on him, like, climbing on his arm and everything else like that. It's, like how, Luffy and the others kind of climbed on Dory and Broggy at Little Garden. And then we have it that they're having, like, this big, kind of bonfire banquet type of a thing, big party. And, like, the giants are all kind of doing, like, the Nika dance, and, like, some of the citizens are doing, like, the Nika dance, so we're getting that. And it's just like, look at it like this, Harald. The destination, the destruction of anything in this world is a waste. So, and I think that's supposed to be Ida telling him this. Like, the destruction of anything in the world is going to hurt someone. The destruction of this home, or this church, or this castle, or this building, or whatever, is going to hurt someone who either lives there or works there, or has some type of value in this building. And doing that to a whole town, a whole village, a whole kingdom, again, it's destroying stuff that is where someone's home is. And that's what she's trying to teach him. And he seems to be learning. And we cut back to the ship, and they're sailing on. And she's talking, and she's like, I was born on Samawani Island in the South Blue. I don't think we've heard of that kingdom before. It doesn't ring any bells. Robin is in the West Blue. That's where Ohara was. Where was Saul from? Was Saul from the South or the West? Saul from the South Blue or the West Blue? Saul says he's from the South Blue. She says she's from the South Blue. Connections, probably. They may, maybe not from the same family, but maybe at least from the same, like, colony of giants. And she's like, one thing led to another, and I ended up on these seas. So it's, again, she's talking about, like, yeah, stuff happened, and I ended up here. And, we kind of cut around where we kind of see, like, we're seeing stuff in the panels. It's like her and Harald are talking. He's like, you went over the blood-soaked serpent? And she's like, are you talking about the red line? Well, yeah, I did, but I can't go back now. So he said you went over it. Now, for a giant, getting over the red line may not be quite as hard, but there'd still be a lot of stuff you have to go through. To be fair, we do find out that the giants can travel through, can, like, I guess, get their ships coated and sail through, sail through, Fishman Island, through the Ryugu Kingdom. It's just probably much bigger of an undertaking for them to do so. So again, this other reference to, like, the blood-soaked serpent that, like, of the version of the Red Line that, like, Dory and Broggy, talked about it way back in Little Garden when they talked about, we can cut through anything that's not the blood-soaked serpent type of a thing. And, like, we see them going to this other kingdom where they're interacting with, like, the natives that look a little bit more like, like the native culture, kind of like Native American or something like that type of a culture. And, like, instead of Harald, like, looming over them like we saw him doing before, he is, like, down on their level. He is, like, laying down on the ground with Ida, and they're, like, trying to be, like, eye to eye with the natives of this island as much as possible. And he even has, like, a little white flag and a stick that he's waving to show that he doesn't mean any harm. And then, we cut to, like, the next panel, and it's him having pulled, like, a shark out of the water, and it's, like, laying it on the shore of this other island to give to the citizens of this island. Now, whether or not this is the same island we just saw, probably is the same one. And like the dialogue is, "Come to Elbath. We're not as savage as you think." So this is Harald inviting Ida to Elbath, and she's like, "Yeah, maybe I judged you too harshly." So she's like, "Okay, well, you kind of, I kind of gave you a second chance, and you kind of proved yourself with like helping the Bunt Kingdom and everything else like that. Now you're kind of, sailing, I'm sailing with you type of a thing. So maybe, maybe I can, maybe I can go and find out that Elbath's not the horrible version of a place that I have been taught that it is." So she's going to head off and do that. She's going to go with them. And then we cut to where we have, like, it's in the evening as, like, the sun is setting, and we have, like, Harald and Ida just, like, on the side of the ship, just, like, talking type of a thing, which is adorable. Very reminiscent of, like, Odin and Toki doing the same thing as, like, they're getting to know each other. And, like, a couple of the crew members are watching, just like how they had, like, Marco and Jozu and some of the others, like, watching watching as all of this happens. As like essentially as like they're falling in love as they talk. And like one of the guards is like, or one of the other crew is just like, "King Harald has really changed." And it's just like, it's kind of creepy. Hopefully it's just a phase. May or may not be just a phase. I don't think it's just a phase, considering that this has like life-changing things that are going on here for Elbath and for Harald and for all of it. So now it's Elbath 105 years ago. So 4 years have passed, and they have made their way back to Elbath. And he's making this big announcement to the citizens. He's like, "Up until now, we've committed countless sins, and it's time we atone for them." And they're like, "What's wrong with you, kid? What's wrong with you, Harald?" Because like presumably when he left, he was very much this a scumbag or total scum, the way that he's referred to at the end of the last chapter. He very much he was that way to possibly his citizens as well, and now he's shown back up again, and he has changed. And he is like having these different opinions and everything else like that. And he's like, "As king, I intend to frequently travel overseas. I hope to extend a hand of reconciliation to our neighbors and learn from their cultures. Our land can become more prosperous if we learn from the world." So again, this is like him being like, okay, our country does not hold the answers to everything. And I see that now. And if I go out and if I make these connections to these other countries, other kingdoms, other places, other islands, however you want to phrase it, they can teach us stuff that we can use to improve our lives here, and we can teach them things to help them improve their lives there, or help them in other various ways. Building these different types of like connections and different things like that, not necessarily just for trade and commerce, but different things like that. And I mean, the same thing is done in our world today. Like, they're going to mention, like, sending diplomats and stuff like that. Like, we send diplomats to so many different countries around the world. And, back when I did the video where I talked about, like, the world government in regards to how that works and, like, the Council of Kings, that is very much similar to how, like, the United Nations works. For, like, how, like, so many different countries are represented there. And different things like that. So we're getting like Harald is like, this is something that I want to do, that I'm going to put the effort into to trying to do this. And like we just see some of the other giants and it's just like Dorian Bragi and the others will never stop running wild, and like they're laughing. And Harald's like, "I go way back with those two. They have always had an unusual disposition. They've never failed to treat humans fairly and honorably." I love this. This is the callback all the way back to like the little garden flashback that we get when like the narrator comes on to explain why Dorian Bragi have been essentially at their duel of honor for the past 100 years. It's because like some little girl in a village that they were happily partying with, in all honesty, just asked, "Which one of you killed the bigger Sea King?" And then results in this the 100-year long duel that went on Little Garden. And like like, and even like when Dory and Bragi first interact with the Straw Hats, when they get there, like we find out that, like, in the last chapter we find out that they knew Shanks and Gabon and all of that stuff, and knew the Roger Pirates and all of that stuff. Like, somehow the Roger Pirates landed on Little Garden and interacted with Dory and Bragi. So it's like Harald's like, yeah, no, they're Dory and Bragi, yeah, they're not always they're much gentler giants than like I am, type of thing is what he's saying. And like someone in the crowd is like, that's true. And we see him like looking out on the crowd. And first of all, Panda Man is in the crowd. That's adorable. We see several different Vikings that have either the horns that are very clearly like their own horns, or they're like helmets, the helmets that we see. And Harald continues, and it's just like, we can still hold on, or they're, someone in the crowd is like, we can still hold on to our warrior ways, right? Which is a valid question. I mean, lots of cultures have gone through this problem where it's just like, they're this very warrior-centric culture, and then stuff happens, and it's just like, okay, well, that's not the best way of, dealing with the world anymore, dealing with other countries and stuff like that. This warrior culture isn't the best way of doing this anymore. And that's kind of one of the questions that's being asked here, is like, can we still hold on to our ways? And there is a difference between holding on to your ways to honor those ways and just doing them because it's like, oh, let's just, use these weapons and fight and everything else like that just because we can. Or it's like, is this, and then learning how to use it in the right situations. In the certain situations, like what the current environment is on Elbath with all of the God Knights and the Muma and everything else like that, and the Gunko Emu and everything else like that, very much valid time to be using all of your warrior skills and everything else, your warrior ways and everything else like that. Just beat the heck out of them. Do that. No arguments here. Other times, when things are at peace, maybe the peaceful route, the less weapony and sharp and pointy and bloodsheddy route is the better answer here. And Harald says, we may have to reconsider some traditions if other countries feel threatened. So that's not saying that they're just going to throw away everything that they've had. Just throw away all these 100,000 whatever years of culture that the Elbathians have. We have to see how this will affect other countries that we deal with. And yes, we can still be warriors. We just have to learn how to like wield our weapons in a way that is not just beneficial for us, but beneficial for our allies. That's something people in the world these days, in this day and age, could learn from. So then we see Jorl and Jarl, a bit younger, about 105 years younger in the case of Jarl, about 63 years younger in the case of Jorl, and they're like, what a change, and it's just like, seems there's a tumultuous journey ahead. And they do look a bit younger. I mean, this is a good chunk of time before they would have met Linlin. Good 40-something years before the Linlin incident happened. And then we see, like, Ida is there. And she's like, Harald this. No, Harald is Elbath. Elbath is blessed. And, like, she's talking with some of the other citizens. I'm not sure. It's not her that's talking. I think it's like someone else. It might be Jorl or Jarl that are like saying this, or it might just be someone else saying it. So then we cut around back to like the jumping around a bunch. Very similar to like what we see with like the Odin flashback and stuff like that, with like him going around Wano and then him traveling around with the Whitebeard pirates and then the Roger pirates and stuff like that, where we see all of that. Like, so this is like this all jumping around, very similar to that. And we have him show up at like this other island, and he's got like this giant thing of like giant ale that is like bigger than like this island's buildings. And it's just like, Say we exchange diplomats with other nations. We could build a deeper cultural understanding. Again, this is, this whole setup of like sending, diplomats to each other, having embassies at different islands, just like the same way here we have like embassies in different countries and other countries have embassies here. To help with, international communication and cooperation. So someone's like, I see. So it's like a fancy hostage deal, huh? And Harold's like, that's not it at all. People need to forge connections. Otherwise, international cooperation is impossible. And like we cut into where we see him literally writing in a journal that is like almost exactly the same way that we see Odin writing in his journal, in his logbook and everything else like that. We see him there. Harold's like at a study probably on like the ship, and we see Ida sleeping in the background. And then we cut to Elbath 81 years ago, Eastern Fishing Village. You finally had the baby! Ida, Harold, congratulations! And so this is like one of the other, like we know that there's like the Western Village, and we're going to find out about like there's the Saki Village, and there's the Craftsman's Village, and there's like the Fishing Village here and stuff like that. So it's like the different villages in Elbath and everything else like that. We're just learning about other various areas. And Harold is just happy, and he's like, thank you, Ida and I. And we see a bunch of like, they're just supposed to be like the shadowy figures of like the other people, advisors, whatever, of Elbath, and they're like, unfortunately, we can't recognize your marriage. Only pure blood can be permitted within the royal family. Okay, we're getting Harry Potter flashbacks now, aren't we? I mean, this is, again, stuff that was implied already with everything that we saw with the way that, like, they talked about Hyrudine and the differences for how they talked about Hyrudine and how they talked about Loki way back, when, like, Loki is referred to as, like, the Prince of Elbath, whereas Hyrudine is referred to as a son of the king, but he's not a prince, because his mother is not Harold's legitimate legal wife. It's going back to the way that they have like bastards and trueborn children in Game of Thrones, or even nowadays it's, children born out of wedlock, or different things like that. Now, I don't have a problem with children born out of wedlock. I have several family members who have had children that are born out of wedlock, or who were born out of wedlock in some cases. And I don't have a problem with that. We're going to get into a comparison with my own family here in a minute. Because, as I have pointed out before, my sister and I are half-sisters. We have the same dad, different moms. And my sister is 12 years older than I am. And yet, we have always had, like, a very strong bond with each other. We don't have like this type of a relationship that we're going to kind of see the way that Hyrudine seems to look upon with Loki in the beginning, not in comparison to like how they currently are in the story, but like in the beginning here when Loki is first born. But like what we see here is like Harold is visiting Ida in the fishing village, and he's like, damn it, forgive me, Ida, because he doesn't like that he can't marry her, because she's the one that he loves. She is the one that he wants to marry and wants to be with, and have Hyrudine be his heir. And of course we see little baby Hyrudine with his little bald head and no horns, and Harold's probably very happy about that. And Ida's like, all these issues boil down to culture. Our feelings alone won't change things. And we see, like, the citizens of the village very much like Ida. And I think the thing is that a lot of the citizens of Elbath very much like Ida. And they, I don't think, would have a problem if Harold married her. The ones who would have the problem are the ones who are, like, the very powerful, higher-up lords and, like, high-ranking chiefs and stuff like that of the village, of the different villages and stuff like that. The very, very old bloodlines type of a thing that would have more of this issue with it than the way that a lot of the other just normal citizens would be. And like they're all like cheering for like, you're always welcome in our village, Ida, for like, just like her being able to be there. So now we know that the village where Hyrule grew up at the very least. And we see like the close up of them, and she's like, "Isn't it great, Hyrule? At least you can stay near your papa." And Hyrule's like, because he's a baby. This is already at an hour in the recording process, and I have to edit out a little bit, and it's not even finished yet, and we're only getting to the next woman in Harald's life. So, time to meet Loki's mother. Okay, so, introduction here. We are introduced to Harald, meet your future bride. Lady Estrid, or Astrid, depending on how you want to put it, carries the noble blood of the ancient giants. She is a woman truly fit to become queen. And we get to see this other one who is like very in contrast with the way that, like, she's back to the very typical way that Oda draws like the female beauties in One Piece and stuff like that. As I stated, I really, really like Ida's design. I think that it's a really good one because it's more unique in how Oda draws women. This is back to the typical way of like, the very beautiful face, long flowing hair. She's in like this kind of like dancer girl outfit, very similar to what Nami and Vivi wear in Alabasta, that type of setup. Whereas Ida was in much more modest clothing that looked more like a t-shirt and a pair of jeans, or like a tank top and jeans, or stuff like that. That was much more modest clothing as opposed to Estrid here. And so it's like Elbath, Alcohol Village, daughter from a prominent background, Estrid. And she's like, I was born in Alcohol Village to the north. I am a student of the earth wind arts. So the way that this kind of was set up, it was like, so the earth wind arts that she's kind of referring to are kind of supposed to be like the One Piece equivalent of like, it's like I think the translation initially was like Deng Shi or something like Deng Fu, something like that. It's supposed to be like feng shui, how like, the way that like a furniture is set up in like a room and stuff like that. Doors open, doors close, windows open, windows close, certain items, stuff like that have like bad energy and stuff like that for like the way that like a room is set up. That certain things bring good luck and certain things bring bad luck and different things like that. So that's what she's like referring to. And so she's very superstitious in that regard. And we just see her like going up to Harald and be like, I am fated to love you for the rest of my life. Forget about that Eastern woman and her bastard. And Harald's kind of like, yeah, no, that's not happening, is kind of the look on his face. And she just like shifts into going into like her feng shui reorganization of everything. And she just like shifts, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna get to the feng shui in a second for her rearranging everything. The way that she is literally like, oh, forget about that other woman and be in love with me type of a thing. Forget about her and your child that you clearly care about. This woman that you clearly love, who you have spent the past 20-something years changing because you met her. Because of the impact she had on you and that you chose to have a child with her and that you clearly want to marry her. Forget all about her and forget about that little baby that you just had. I am the woman who you're supposed to be in love with. I am the woman that you are destined to marry, is essentially what she is saying here. Again, gonna go back to some historical references here. Multiple times throughout the course of history, obviously, there have been so many different kings and queens who have had arranged marriages. Much more recently, in the last 75 to 100 years, love matches have become much more of a thing. We see this even with like Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, and with William and Catherine, and like all these other ones where it's like in other countries as well. There's a princess in, I want to say it's somewhere in the Netherlands area, like that area, I don't remember exactly. Netherlands, who married her physical trainer because they were in love and her family was fine with it. And all that stuff. So it's like, it is not uncommon, much more recently it's been like these love matches setups Whereas in other countries, in like so many of those same countries, go back 100, 200, 300, go back however many other 100,000 years you want to go. And it was all generally like just arranged marriages of, oh, you're going to marry this princess from this kingdom, and then your sister is going to go marry this prince in this other kingdom, and then his sister is going to go over and marry this princess in this other kingdom. So that way all of these kingdoms are now tied in some type of an alliance, so that way if someone attacks one of us, we all work together to take out this other person. Various marriages were used to end wars and other conflicts like that. Various kings of England married brides from Spain and France, and vice versa. In various, arranged marriages that were sometimes set up when they were children, other times they weren't until they were a bit older. And in some of those cases, there ended up being, love matches. King George and Queen Charlotte, if you want to look at one, for England. In that regard, some had better love matches than others. Some, it was like they did their duty and they got along just fine and they had their children, and then the king had his affairs, and occasionally the queen would have her own affairs because maybe she was more into women and she would have her favorites that way. Things with courtly love. But there were cases where there would be queens who would come in to marry a king, a princess that would be brought in to marry a king who had maybe already had a wife and they had passed, or had already had several of his own like mistresses, and maybe had a couple of already illegitimate children. And then like this new the princess would be brought in and they would get married, and then they would have like the legitimate children to the throne. And in some cases, that queen would try to do everything to try to get rid of the king's lovers and stuff like that. But there was sometimes very little that they could do. And in some cases, the queens had very little power in that regard, and the mistresses actually had more power overall. Various times in France, this is what happened. Other cases, if the king had a favorite, sometimes the queen was, you're less interesting to me. You gave me an heir or two and you've fulfilled your purpose, blah, 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 blah. I'm more in love with this other woman over here who I legitimately have feelings for, but I could not marry. As much as I don't necessarily care for the way that the romance has gone, we have Charles, Camilla, and Princess Diana. Is essentially kind of a very similar setup here. But I don't know how much Diana was trying to, kind of force Philip to love her in this type of a regard. To be fair, I'm much more on the Diana side of things in that regard. But we cut to where Estrid is like, she's like, the energies here are aligned to the east. This won't do at all. The king's split. The king's spirit is leaking out. Quick, shut the windows. What? And that mirror, it's positioned at a lethal 5-star configuration. Dispose of it. And like, she's like having them rearrange all of the stuff in like in like this room area. A lethal 5-star configuration. I wonder if that's going to come back to reference anything. And then we see her bring him this awesome effing horse, which I will agree with. This is an awesome looking horse. She's like, meet Ashura, the horse of good fortune. This is a 8-legged horse. And its mane kind of looks like it's like burning candles type of a thing, which is cool. This thing is huge. Like, it is like big enough for Harald to be able to ride on. And she's like, it is a fine steed worthy of you, your majesty. Consider it a gift from my family. It's sure to bring you good fortune. Ashura, or Asura, depending on how you want to put this for the translation. This is a reference to the 8-legged steed that Odin had, Sleipnir, which I have referenced before when they were going through and talking about Loki and like all of the crimes he committed, that like, oh, the horse died, and so this horse isn't isn't long for this world, unfortunately. And then going into the name Estrid or Astrid, depending on how it's been translated. The way that it is done here for Estrid, the way that it's here is if baby is the fairest of them all, then consider the name Estrid, a beautiful feminine name of Norse origin. Estrid means fair and beautiful goddess and is a variant of the Old Norse name Astrid. Anyone who's a How to Train Your Dragon fan, Astrid there. Your little goddess is sure to grow up to be a force of both nature and beauty. With a name like this, some noble namesakes include just some various queens and other such queens and princesses of Denmark and Sweden go into this. So there's that, which is fun. A bunch of that stuff there. And also we have like it's like two of the little servant guards that like even Estrid is like taller than these guards in comparison to like how tall she is compared to Harald, compared to the guards, which is just funny. And it's like, it's huge. Why does it have 8 legs? A valid question. And she goes like, guards, take all of the jewels and gold to my room. Why? Why are we taking all the jewels and gold to your room? And it's just like, the king's vicinity should be focused on the energies of earth and wind. Also, inform the servants that from today onwards, the king and I will take all of our meals on silver platters. I don't like her. I don't like her now. I'm not going to like her even more by the time we get to the end of the chapter. I think that's going to be a lot of people's opinions of her. To be fair, I had kind of been hoping before we got like this reveal that like maybe Loki's mother was going to be maybe a character we could have some sympathy for. That maybe she was more forced into this marriage more than like by her parents or something like that. Because in the past, lots of princesses did not get a say in who they married. It was your father or your uncle or your older brother or younger brother in some cases has decided that you are going to go and marry this king or this prince of this kingdom. And you will probably never be returning home again, type of a thing. Happened a lot, sadly. So it's like that type of a thing. But if it had been that type of a thing, I would have a bit more sympathy for Estrid. But I really don't have a lot of sympathy for her at the moment. And one of the guards is thinking, isn't that just indulgence? For like having everything on like silver platters. And so we cut back, still cut into the future a little bit more. So we have 70-ish years ago. In the age, in this age, the rough seas still made travel between islands difficult. And the way that Harald's ship is sailing looks like it is sailing toward those giant stone towers that we saw on the way to Wano. Way back when Luffy and the others were first on their way to Wano. Looks very similar to that. And he's going to mention, I think he might mention Wano. Maybe. But I'm not sure. And then we also see him talking with another group. Now, this ship here, I can't tell because it's like Harald's like holding the ship in his hand and he's showing them a compass. And he's like, Elbaf's advanced navigation techniques intrigued other countries. So he's like, there is a star which never moves called the Pole Star. And they're like, oh, really? So this is the kanji for North Star is what's used here. And Pole Star Island, or Lodestar Island, is the island that is way at the end of the Grand Line. That's the last island that all of the log posts point to, is what this is referencing, or is what this is pointing out. So I'm not sure if this is supposed to be like Harald actually legitimately made it to Wano and is like having a conversation with, like, I don't know, past citizens of Wano, long dead at this point in time. Well, maybe not. 70-ish years ago. Because 70-ish years ago, I looked this up. Hold on. 70-ish years ago is when Hirogoro was born. And it was also when Shimasuke Ushimaru was born. Now I get to somebody else who was born 70 years ago, but we'll get to that in a second. So Hirogoro and Ushimaru are like babies during this time frame. Laoji is also a baby during this time frame because he was born this year as well. So there's like that. That's, stuff getting referenced here for the Pole Star Island, the North Star. And then we have Harald is sitting and he's back on Elbath and he's like talking to the citizens, and he's grown a beard. He's he's like slowly growing out like a beard. He's like slowly growing like this like massive beard that we're gonna see him have later in life. And he's like there again, and he's like back on Elbath, and he's like telling a bunch of the citizens about what he has seen, about the different countries and cultures and stuff like that he has interacted with on his travels. And they're like, King Harald, you met the fishmen? They're like, we even see like a bear sitting here and like talking, like listening to Harald talk, which is kind of fun. It's like, this is just reminding me of like, it's very similar to how when Nolan returned from his trip, where Nolan the Liar, where that comes into play, where he like returned from his trip, where he met Kalgra and the Shandians and all of that stuff, and found Shandora and like saw the city of gold and everything, and how he goes back to level kingdom, something like that. I don't remember. It's been a while. Finding his way back there, and he's like sitting and telling all of the children these stories about like what he saw. And this is very similar to that. And Harald is just like, yep, it's about time. I even saw mermaids. Their people carry the blood of the ocean. In their country, a prince was born by the name of Neptune. So 70 years ago is when Neptune was born, is what they're referencing here. So we get that. And he's like, and it wasn't just fishmen and mermen around. The sea creatures themselves were coming together in jubilation. So this is, all of the sea beasts and the sea kings and everything else like that. And they're just like, wow, and they're just amazed by these stories that they're hearing from Harald. And again, this is just Harald coming back and telling them all of these different stories. And bear in mind, so 81 years ago and 70 years ago would have been during the time frame that Mother Caramel was already on the island. I marked it down. When did Mother Caramel first get to the island? First get to Elbath. Because Mother Caramel set up the sheep's house on Elbath 100 years ago. Is when the sheep's house, the lamb's house, was first set up. Because that is like right after everything happens with Dory and Bragi on Little Garden, and that's when like a bunch of the giants on their way back to Elbath are captured by the world government and tried, and Mother Caramel shows up and she saves them, and all of that. So like Mother Caramel is already on the island during this time frame. She has been on the island for 30 years at this point. 70 years ago. She's been on the island for 30 years at this point. And has had the lamb's house and has sold who knows how many children into slavery and to the celestial dragons, to the world government, to cipher pull agencies. Take your pick. Who knows how many children she has sold to them already. And how much influence she has had on Harald, maybe even Estrid, to a degree. We don't know. Probably not, but possible. And like I'm looking here at this picture, and I don't see, and like this crowd shot, and I don't see anyone that looks like they would be Mother Caramel. But on like Harold is like sitting on a log, and on this log, on like the little end of the log, seems to be a child sitting there. So I'm wondering if that's supposed to be Haradine, who would be like 11-ish, going on 12 range at this point in time. So like 6 or like 11. So he's like a toddler, like 4-ish years old, give or take, like, you know, physically. And then we cut to 63 years ago, which is, of course, when Loki is born. So this is where the title of the chapter comes from. We have the birth of Loki. And it's 63 years ago, Oust Castle, Elbath, while Harald was overseas. So Harald is not there during this point in time. And given how much Harald is out and traveling and everything else like that, it's not surprising that it took like 7 years. Plus, Harald probably didn't necessarily care that much for Estrid, for them to have a child. But they're like, congratulations, my queen. It's a healthy baby boy. And it's just like, his name is Loki. I spoke with the king about it. And she's like, let me get a good look at my son's face. And they're, you know, bringing Loki toward her. And they show her Loki. And Loki just he's got the little horns on his head. Got the little bald baby head. And then he has, like, they're described as, like, slitted eyes, like, very much like the eyes of Sauron, like the eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings is the way they look and the way that they're described. And a lot of people were thinking, oh, the reason Loki has his eyes covered is maybe because he's got scars. But then we saw that, oh, when he's a kid, he still has his eyes covered because he has, like, the bandages over them. And now we're seeing this, that as a baby, he has like these, you know, slitted, you know, type eyes that are more like snake-like type of a thing, which in Norse mythology and at times in even Marvel, Loki has turned into a snake, so that's not surprising. But as a reference, I do have a version of the One Ring. So I just wanted to pull that out, but she just freaks out. She is just like, and she just like jumps out of their own bed as she like sees them holding like the little carrier that they have Loki in is like a little mini like boat, which is adorable. That's adorable. And she's just like, it's horrid. And they're like, Your Highness. Was like, it's freaking me out. What is it? This isn't. This thing can't possibly be mine. And they're like, Your Highness, please calm down. And as probably a lot of people have, I have seen Wicked. I have seen the movie, and I've read enough of the stuff to know, you know, and everything else like that for what's going to happen in Wicked. But this very much reminds me of the beginning of the movie and the beginning of the musical, where Elphaba is born, and she is, you know, her mother and father are just so excited, and then she's born, and she's green, and everybody freaks out about it, and like her father is just horrified by this concept of like his daughter is green, and then he just like despises her for the rest of his life, simply because she is green, is like what they do. And like this is Estrid here is just like, I get it. There are babies that get born with birth defects that maybe are born blind, or, you know, different things like that you may not know right away, or babies get born, you know, different other types of things. And, you know, in lots of cultures, if babies were twins, that was seen as a bad thing. Or if, you know, babies were born breech birth, you know, the feet first instead of head first, depending on how it goes, that's not a good thing. If babies were, you know, as I went over when, like, they were talking about all the bad things that they blame on Loki, there's so many different things that comes with, like, the births of babies. Either for physically how the child looks or physically the way the child is born, that can be seen as a bad sign, as a bad omen type of a thing. And sometimes that was stuff that they then, you know, blamed on other things and different things like that. And Estrid is just freaking out here, and she's like, tell the king it was a stillbirth. This is utterly unacceptable, because this is also going into like Estrid's own pride of like, this child cannot be mine. It's cursed. Just look at it. It's a monster, is the way that she is referring to it, to her own son. And I am well aware of the fact that there are mothers who go through postpartum depression. My grandmother went through it on my mother's side, probably after a couple of her children were born. Other times it is either portrayed very seriously. In other cases, it's just, glossed over in different media. But postpartum depression is a very serious thing, because sometimes it makes it harder for the mothers to connect to their children. It can put the mother's life at risk and the baby's life at risk at various points. Lots of things like that. And that's one thing. This is just straight up, Estrid is just like, no, this cannot be my child. This thing is not mine. I don't want this. This is not my fault. This is not my problem. That thing is not mine. And then we get like this, baby Loki, like his little hands reaching up, and it's just like, when the Prince of Elbas stretched his arms into the air, no one was there to take those small hands in theirs. And Estrid grabs Loki and is just running full tilt, like out of the palace to the balcony, whatever. And they're like, Your Highness, stop this. That's the prince. And she like chucks him and drops him. Like he falls from balcony, whatever, at Oust Castle, and just falls into the underworld. And we see him fall. This is a baby that is probably not even an hour old, falling into the underworld. And the narration is, it is said that the most unfortunate souls are those rejected from birth by their own mother. And this made me think of another thing from mythology, not from Norse mythology, but from Greek mythology / Roman mythology, in regards to Hephaestus. In regards to Hephaestus, it is one of the variations of the myth of Hephaestus is that he is born of Hera and Zeus. Zeus is his father, Hera is his mother, and he is born cripple. And Hera is disgusted by this. And she takes him and she flings him off of Olympus. And he falls and falls and falls until he lands in the ocean, where he is found by nymphs and dryads and is raised by them. And then eventually he does, earn his way up to Mount Olympus as the god of forging and fire and stuff like that, as Hephaestus, the god of fire and forge and everything else like that, and god of craftsmen, is like what happens there. But he is crippled and, tossed by Hera into the abyss, because she does not want to bear this as a child, to have this child be something of hers, whereas other children that Zeus has had with other women have been perfect in appearance or perfect in ability, and this son is not. And that's how that's depicted there. And we have Estrid saying, "Listen to me. No child was born today. I forbid you from telling anyone." And we see her going, and she's trying to pack up all of the jewels and everything. And one of the guards is like, "Where are you going?" And it's like, "I'm returning to my village. I never want to give birth again." It's like, okay. And the guard is just like, "Your Highness, Captain." And so it's someone running in, and the person is just like, "It's coming from the realm of the dead." And Estrid turns, and she's like, "The realm of the dead, what about it?" And we see heartbreaking image, this heartbreaking image that very much sums up probably a lot of why Loki is the way that he is. Loki, bruised and bloody as a baby, is like climbing up the treasure tree at him from the underworld. He survived well, spoiler alert, he survived the landing. Unnecessary spoiler alert, he survived the landing. And he is now climbing up the tree to get back to where he was from. He landed. I think it's supposed to be that like he landed among beasts, or that like something broke his fall, because like there's another picture and it looks like there's something, but I can't tell. It looks like maybe something broke his fall, but I'm not sure. And it's climbing, and he is climbing up the tree, and we have it that like soon after Queen Estrid collapsed due to ill health. And she's like, dispose of the child. It's becoming clear that was foretold long ago. This was foretold long ago, before it came into the world. It is said that King Harald will someday be slain by his own son. And the guard's like, enough of this crazy talk. And we see Harald, and he looks very frustrated, because he is in this case. And he's just like, meanwhile, Harald struggled against the walls of diplomacy. And he's like, blocked by the world government again. Why can't countries just be free? So again, this is like, okay, Harald didn't like what the world government was doing with forcing countries to only interact with other world government countries, type of a thing, preventing him from interacting with them because he's not part of the world government, type of a thing. So we're getting that here. And then there's this whole question of like, okay, well then down the line, what changed? What, why is there this connection between him and the God's Knights, type of a thing, between him and what's going on there? Then we cut to where we have Ida and Little Hyrudine, who we've not seen Little Hyrudine for a while. He's so cute. He's 18 at this point in time, so he's like 6 for how they age. And she's like, hey, he's your little brother. Don't you want to see the little guy? And Hyrudine's like, if he's not your kid, Mom, then there's no way I can call him my little brother. And she's just like, oh, you're sweeter than you're... Oh, sweetie, you're so cute even when you say such awful things. So she's just like, oh, you're so cute. So I didn't mention this before, but the other character that I kind of find that Ida is reminding me of a little bit is Molly Brown, or the unsinkable Molly Brown, who lived from 1867 to 1932. There is a movie based on her life called The Unsinkable Molly Brown. Came out in 1932 is when she died. The movie came out in 1964, starring Debbie Reynolds, may she rest in peace, as Molly Brown. And she is very much this character who speaks her mind, and she's not afraid to try to, make friends and all this other stuff. And she kind of ends up doing something a little bit similar, not exactly similar, but a little bit similar between her and her husband, Johnny J. Brown. Where it's like, in the movie, they make her the impetus for like why they end up being rich, why they end up having so much money and everything else like that. Fun fact, I have been to her house when, after I graduated from high school, my dad took me on a trip to Colorado. We went to Estes Park, and then we made our way to Denver, which is where Molly Brown lived, in Denver, on, I believe, Pennsylvania Avenue. And we got to go on a tour of her historic home, which was very fun, and I very much enjoyed it. So that was kind of the last one there that I wanted to point out. And then, the comparison between, like, Hera throwing Hephaestus off of Olympus, and in this case it's Estrid throwing Loki out of the castle and into the underworld. And like the last bit of the chapter is we see then like little Loki with his horns and his and his well, it's a club at the time, and it's just like from then on every misfortune that struck Elbath was chalked up to Loki's curse. And we're on break next week. So yeah, there's a lot there. This video is going to be over an hour and a half long. Fun. So yeah, there's a lot here with this. There was a lot in this chapter. Plus I had a lot of tangents. Sorry. It's the way my mind works. But, yeah, essentially two very different women that are involved in Hyrudine's life. We have Ida, who is this woman that he is legitimately in love with, wants to marry, wants to be with, everything else like that. Would probably make an amazing queen of Elbaf. And then we have Estrid, who very much more is this very vain and surface level type of a character who, like, the appearance of this room is why everything is wrong. It's like, no, that's not the case. And, you know, surface level, like, oh, my child looks horrid like this, so just chuck him out the window or whatever. And we know, obviously, because of what we see in Big Mom's flashback, and then, of course, just obviously what we see now currently in the story. I'm going to get to another thing that I just thought of in a second. That Loki obviously ends up, like, the citizens end up learning about Loki, obviously, because, like, they celebrate his birth and everything else like that. And, of course, you know, Harald will end up finding out about Loki. Question is going to be how happy or upset is he going to be about the fact that Estrid threw their child out of a window and into the underworld. How that's going to work. The other thing that I just thought of, and it was one of the questions that I had possibly kind of vaguely hinted at when I talked about why Loki would have been interested in Lola. And because we have not seen the full setup for, like, how they met, it would have happened during the time frame after he had killed Harald and while he was out at sea, before Shanks caught him and dragged him back to Elbaf 6 years ago. It would have been before that he would have met Lola in some shape or form. However that meeting would have gone. But I find it very interesting that possibly Loki was more interested in Lola because of the fact that she maybe didn't have, and again, I'm not calling Lola ugly, I am not, but she had more of this inner beauty and inner strength that he may have seen from Ida, you know, as Hyrudine's mother and all of this stuff, because they probably would have ended up being around each other at various points in time. And that he would have seen her have this, like, inner strength that, like, his own mother did not have. Now, Estrid is supposed to die about a year after Loki is born, and we know that, like, the horse is supposed to die, too, pretty quickly. Poor horse. The horse didn't deserve this. The horse didn't ask for this. But it's this, this thing of, like, he may have proposed to Lola because he saw something in her that was maybe similar to a type of strength that he had seen in Ida that his own mother did not possess. Particularly if he has memories of this time here, or has memories of these other things going on. That may have been a reason why he was interested in Lola, as opposed to wanting to just have some beautiful bride that they probably would have been very easily able to, like, locate and give him in Elbaf, had that been the case. It's like he could have had any bride he wanted as the prince, type of a thing. So that's what we have there. Bit longer than way a bit longer, like twice as long as I intended this video to be. Sorry. But I thank you for watching, for everyone who did actually watch all the way through this video. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope you have a good weekend. Bye!